to the natural and church-approved order. Worst of all, predicting anything good could be just as dangerous as predicting disaster. If you said, "The baby will be a boy," and it was, people would ask how you knew. And in the absence of biology textbooks, the answer was obvious: magic. In the Middle Ages, growing old wasn't automatically respected. It was tolerated at best, suspicious at worst. And if you lived past the age when you could work the fields, bear children, or stir a pot without spilling half of it, you were in dangerous territory. Because in a world where survival was tough, people liked tidy explanations for unusual things, and living too long practically screamed sorcery. You see, most people didn't make it past 40. If you were still shuffling around at 70, the question wasn't, "What's your secret?" It was, "Whose soul did you steal to get here?" Longevity was viewed less as the result of good genetics and more as the byproduct of dark pacts, especially if you looked spry enough to carry your own firewood. The risk only grew if you outlived most of your peers. With fewer people around to remember your youth, you could be cast as anything in the village's collective memory. The mysterious midwife, the bitter neighbour, the woman who once muttered something about rain in 1346 and was eerily correct. By the time you hit your 80s, you weren't a person anymore. You were a walking, talking repository of suspicious stories. Even the normal signs of aging worked against you. Wrinkled skin, proof the devil had marked you. Failing eyesight, obviously the result of too many late-night rituals by candlelight. A hunched back. That's what happens when you've carried a cauldron around for decades. And let's not forget the medieval obsession with witches' teeth. If you were missing a few, people might assume you'd used them in potions. And heaven help you if you were still mentally sharp. In a society where most people couldn't read, knowing things, especially at your age, could only mean one thing: you were hoarding forbidden knowledge. You weren't wise, you were dangerous. To make matters worse, older women were particularly vulnerable. Without a husband to protect them, they were seen as socially adrift, and therefore more likely to be spending time with less reputable company, like spirits or demons. The year was 1119, and the Holy Land stood at a fragile crossroads. The First Crusade had ended 2 decades earlier, leaving a scattering of Christian-held territories in a region still brimming with hostility. The streets of Jerusalem might have felt safe within the city walls, but beyond them, the roads leading to sacred sites were perilous. Pilgrims, poor farmers, noble ladies, even repentant knights, were being ambushed by bandits, enslaved by raiders, or simply killed for their meagre possessions. Every journey to the Holy Sepulchre risked becoming a one-way trip. Into this dangerous world stepped a French knight named Hugues de Payan. A man of deep piety but also clear-eyed practicality, Hugues saw that swords could serve Christ as well as prayers. With 8 fellow knights, he swore a solemn oath in the presence of the Patriarch of Jerusalem, to live as monks, to fight as soldiers, and above all, to protect pilgrims making their way to holy places. This was no small commitment. The men renounced personal wealth, took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, and pledged their lives to a cause that could end at any roadside ambush. Their headquarters was no ordinary lodging. King Baldwin II granted them quarters on the Temple Mount, in a wing of the former Al-Aqsa Mosque, believed by crusaders to stand on the site of King Solomon's temple. From this sacred location, the knights took their name, the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, or simply the Knights Templar. Their appearance was stark and symbolic, a plain white mantle for purity, marked with a bold red cross for martyrdom. They were not wandering mercenaries, they were an armed brotherhood, accountable only to the Pope himself. This made them immune from local political squabbles, a fact that would both empower them, and, in time, make them dangerous to their enemies. In their early years, the Templars were few in number and modest in resources, relying on donations from nobles in Europe, who saw them as the Church's sword arm in the East. But word of their courage began to spread. Pilgrims spoke of white-cloaked knights riding fearlessly into danger, cutting through ambushes like avenging angels. In an age when faith and war were inseparable, the Templars embodied both. Holy men who carried Bibles in their hearts and steel in their hands. It was the beginning of an order that would grow far beyond its humble origins, building a legacy of castles, wealth, and mystery that would haunt history for centuries. Long before swords were drawn in the Holy Land, another group had already planted its roots in Jerusalem, not as warriors, but as caregivers. The Order of the Knights of the Hospital of St. John of Jerusalem, later known simply as the Hospitallers, began in the 11th century as a humble brotherhood, tending to sick and weary pilgrims. In a city sacred to three faiths, they offered medicine, food, and shelter without asking questions about a traveller's birthplace or past sins. But after the First Crusade in 1099, the world around them changed. The streets filled not only with pilgrims, but with soldiers, merchants, and spies. The air itself seemed thick with tension. The Hospitallers realized that compassion alone would not shield their patients from raiders or war. Under the leadership of Blessed Gerard, and later his successor Raymond Dupuy, the order transformed from a purely charitable mission into a militarized brotherhood. The black cloak they had worn as healers gained a new emblem, a white, eight-pointed cross, symbolizing the virtues they vowed to uphold: faith, humility, mercy, and justice among them. Their role expanded dramatically. No longer confined to hospital wards, the Hospitallers built and manned formidable castles across the Crusader states. Fortresses like Crac de Chevalier in Syria, whose walls would come to be feared by Muslim armies and admired by fellow Crusaders. Within these walls, their dual identity thrived. In one hall, they cared for the sick and wounded. In another, they trained with sword and shield, preparing for the next call to arms. Unlike the Templars, whose reputation rested heavily on elite battlefield prowess, the Hospitallers cultivated a balance between war and charity. A Hospitaller knight might spend one day defending a fortress tower from a siege, and the next changing bandages in a hospital ward. This blend of martial skill and compassion won them widespread respect among both allies and, grudgingly, enemies. Papal recognition in 1113 cemented their independence, placing them under the direct authority of the Pope, free from local rulers' control. This autonomy allowed the Hospitallers to grow wealthy and powerful through donations of land and treasure from across Europe. Every noble who sought spiritual redemption found the Hospitallers a worthy cause to support. By the mid-12th century, the order had become a cornerstone of Crusader defense and logistics. They were not simply soldiers or medics. They were the lifeline of the Crusader states, standing watch over both the living and the dying, in a land where the two were often only a sword's length apart. While the Templars and Hospitallers were already well established in the Holy Land, the Order of Brothers of the German House of St. Mary in Jerusalem, better known as the Teutonic Knights, was born from a more specific need: to serve German-speaking pilgrims and crusaders. The year was 1190, and the Third Crusade was raging. Outside the besieged city of Acre, the conditions were grim. Disease, heat, and wounds claimed more lives than swords. Among the chaos, a group of merchants from Lübeck and Bremen erected a field hospital under a simple tent of ship sails. Its mission was humble but vital: to care for their countrymen in a foreign land where language barriers could mean the difference between life and death. What began as a makeshift infirmary soon grew into a recognized order. In 1198, under the blessing of Pope Innocent III, the Teutonic Knights were formally established as a military monastic order, blending the Hospitallers' healing mission with the Templars' martial discipline. Their habit was striking: a white mantle bearing a bold black cross, a stark contrast to the sunburnt sands of the Levant. Initially their numbers were small, and their influence limited compared to the older orders. But they had one advantage: strong ties to the Holy Roman Empire. Many of their recruits were seasoned German knights, loyal to their homeland's rulers and eager to carry imperial prestige into the Crusader states. They built hospitals, fortified outposts, and joined major campaigns, often fighting alongside their Templar and Hospitaller counterparts. Yet the Holy Land would not be their final stage. The Teutonic Knights soon turned their gaze north and east, where pagan tribes still resisted Christianization. In the early 13th century, they embarked on the Baltic Crusades, carving out a crusader state along the shores of the Baltic Sea. There, they built towering castles of stone, imposed Christian rule, and engaged in decades of brutal warfare against the Prussians, Lithuanians, and Samogitians. In both the Holy Land and Europe, the Teutonic Knights combined fierce military campaigns with an organized, almost bureaucratic approach to governance. They were not just warriors, they were colonizers, administrators, and master builders. Their order's rigid discipline, German efficiency, and unyielding faith made them a formidable force, admired by allies, feared by foes. Though their origins lay in a small hospital tent outside Acre, the Teutonic Knights would grow into one of the most powerful and enduring military orders of the medieval world, leaving a legacy of stone fortresses and contested frontiers. Though the Templars, Hospitallers, and Teutonic Knights differed in origins and missions, they were bound together by a common foundation, the monastic rule that shaped their lives. Joining one of these orders meant more than picking up a sword. It was a total surrender of personal freedom to a life of obedience, discipline, and faith. A recruit, often a knight of noble birth, would renounce all personal wealth upon admission. Lands, titles, and income were handed over to the order, leaving him with nothing but the clothes on his back and the weapons issued to him. In exchange, he received the habit of the order. For Templars, the white mantle with its red cross. For Hospitallers, the black cloak with a white cross. For Teutonic Knights, the white with black. These garments were not simply uniforms. They were symbols of vows taken before God. Life within the order followed a strict rhythm. Days began and ended with prayer, often in the chill of a candlelit chapel. Meals were eaten in silence while scripture was read aloud, a reminder that the knight's body was fed for one reason only, to serve God in battle or charity. Luxuries were forbidden. No hunting for sport, no decorative armour, no brightly coloured clothing. Horses were shared between knights, and personal servants were strictly limited. Even letters from home could be inspected by superiors to prevent distraction from the mission. Above all, knights were expected to live by the 3 monastic vows: poverty, owning nothing for themselves; chastity, forgoing marriage and family; and obedience, carrying out orders without hesitation. But to these vows, the military orders added another: the defence of Christendom, even to the point of martyrdom. A knight was to stand his ground against the enemy, never fleeing unless ordered, and to protect pilgrims, widows, and orphans from harm. Breaking these rules could mean harsh penance, fasting, public humiliation, or even expulsion from the order. Yet the discipline forged by this code created some of the most feared and respected warriors of the medieval world. Their enemies might see them as fanatics, but to fellow Christians, they were holy champions, steel-clad monks who served not for gold or glory, but for the salvation of souls. It was this strict code that allowed small groups of knights to hold fortresses against armies many times their size, to march into hopeless battles without fear, and to inspire awe across Europe and the Middle East. The code was their strength, and in some ways, the seed of their eventual downfall. The Crusader orders did not simply patrol roads or guard gates. They reshaped the very landscape of the medieval Near East. Castles were their lifeblood, both symbols of power and anchors of survival in a hostile land. For the Templars, Hospitallers, and Teutonic Knights, these fortresses were more than military bases. They were centres of administration, supply depots, and rallying points for Christian defence. One of the most legendary was Crac des Chevaliers, a Hospitaller stronghold in modern-day Syria. Perched high on a hill, it looked almost like a city unto itself. Massive concentric walls, deep moats, and towers that could rain death on any approaching army. It could house thousands, store years' worth of supplies, and withstand siege engines for months. Even the great Muslim leader Saladin avoided a direct assault, knowing it would drain his forces. The Templars had their own chain of fortresses, each strategically placed to guard key routes. Safed, Tortosa, and the coastal stronghold of Château Pèlerin bristled with high walls and angular defences designed to deflect stones and arrows. Inside, they contained chapels, barracks, storerooms, and cisterns to collect rainwater. Every inch planned for the long grind of siege warfare. The Teutonic Knights, though less prominent in the Levant, would make their architectural mark in the Baltic. Their castles in Prussia and Livonia were not just fortresses, but symbols of colonization, built in stark brick and stone, dominating the surrounding countryside. Structures like Marienburg Castle in modern Poland became administrative capitals, housing not only soldiers, but also officials, scribes, and treasuries. These castles were rarely built for beauty, yet their imposing presence inspired awe and dread alike. Walls could be 10 meters thick, gates reinforced with iron, and towers positioned to allow crossfire on attackers. Inside, the layout reflected the dual life of the orders. Chapels for prayer stood beside armories stacked with weapons, kitchens and refectories supported daily life, while underground storerooms held enough grain and salted meat to last through years of isolation. Maintaining these fortresses was a monumental task. Supplies had to be shipped from Europe, skilled masons and engineers employed, and garrisons kept ready for sudden attacks. But in a world where alliances shifted quickly and borders were drawn in blood, the castles of the Crusader orders were unyielding anchors, visible proof that faith, steel, and stone could hold back the tide of enemies. Though the Crusader orders were born in vows of poverty, their influence soon made them some of the wealthiest institutions in medieval Christendom. From castles in the Holy Land to estates in France, England, and Germany, the Templars, Hospitallers, and Teutonic Knights controlled vast networks of land, farms, mills, and ports. These holdings were gifts from kings, nobles, and merchants who believed that donating to the orders would secure divine favour, and perhaps a few earthly advantages. The Templars, in particular, mastered a skill that would change European finance: banking. Pilgrims travelling to the Holy Land faced a dangerous problem. Carrying large sums of coin made them prime targets for thieves. The Templars solved this with a system of letters of credit. A pilgrim could deposit funds at a Templar preceptory in Europe, receive a written note, and then withdraw the equivalent in the East. This not only kept the pilgrim safe, but also allowed the Templars to transfer and invest funds on a massive scale. Soon, kings themselves began using Templar treasuries. The order became bankers to monarchs, financing wars, managing royal revenues, and safeguarding national treasures. Their network of fortresses doubled as secure vaults, each garrison a heavily armed branch office. The Hospitallers, though less involved in banking, accumulated their own immense resources through rents, agricultural production, and the spoils of war. Their estates in Europe funded hospitals, castles, and fleets, ensuring their military and charitable work never lacked supplies. The Teutonic Knights, operating in the Baltic, built a self-sustaining economy from conquered lands, levying taxes, monopolizing trade routes, and exploiting resources like amber, a luxury commodity in medieval Europe. Wealth brought undeniable advantages: better armor, stronger castles, and the ability to hire skilled mercenaries when manpower ran short. But it also drew suspicion. In an age when the Church preached humility, the sight of warrior monks dining well, wearing fine cloaks, or holding sway over kings could provoke envy and fear. Still, for centuries, their riches underpinned their military and political dominance. These were not isolated bands of sword-wielding zealots. They were global organizations, with logistical networks stretching from London to Acre, from Lubeck to Cyprus. Their coin could buy ships, armies, and influence, making them as much a force in medieval politics as on the battlefield. In the Crusader era, gold and faith marched hand in hand, and the military orders knew better than anyone how to wield both. The military orders were forged in the crucible of war, and their reputations were sealed on blood-soaked battlefields. From the Levant to the Baltic, the Templars, Hospitallers, and Teutonic Knights fought in some of the most desperate campaigns of the medieval world, often as the shock troops who could turn the tide, or as the last to stand when all hope was gone. One of the Templars' most famous moments came at the Battle of Montgisard in 1177. King Baldwin IV of Jerusalem, stricken with leprosy, led a vastly outnumbered force against Saladin's army. The Templars charged with ruthless precision, shattering the Muslim vanguard and throwing Saladin's ranks into chaos. The victory was a stunning display of discipline over numbers, cementing the Templars' legend as fearless warriors. The Hospitallers earned their own immortal glory during the Siege of Rhodes in 1480, centuries after the loss of the Holy Land. Facing a massive Ottoman fleet and tens of thousands of soldiers, the Hospitallers held out for weeks, their walls battered but unbroken. Every breach was met with sword and shield, and their blend of medical care and martial ferocity kept the defenders fighting even as casualties mounted. The Teutonic Knights, meanwhile, shifted the theatre of war northward. Their defining moment came at the Battle of Grunwald in 1410, when they faced a combined Polish-Lithuanian force. The clash was one of the largest in medieval Europe, and for the Teutonic Order, it ended in disaster. Their Grand Master fell, thousands of knights lay dead, and their power in the Baltic began to wane. Yet even in defeat, their disciplined formations and heavy cavalry charges were remembered as models of medieval warfare. The orders also played crucial roles in less famous but equally vital campaigns, defending supply lines in the Holy Land, escorting pilgrims through enemy territory, and launching raids deep into hostile lands to disrupt enemy logistics. Their mobility, training, and iron discipline allowed them to fight both in open field battles and in grueling sieges, adapting to terrain and circumstance. In victory, they were hailed as God's champions. In defeat, they were martyred in the eyes of their supporters. Their banners, whether bearing the red cross, the white eight-pointed cross, or the black cross, became rallying points on battlefields from Jerusalem to Prussia. These campaigns, both glorious and tragic, carved the orders into the stone of history, not just as monks or warriors, but as symbols of an era when faith and war marched as one. The Crusader orders had been born in the age of the Great Crusades, but as the centuries passed, the world that had created them began to change. By the late 13th century, the Christian strongholds in the Holy Land were falling one by one. The Templars fought fiercely at Acre in 1291, but when the city fell, the last major Crusader outpost in the east was gone. The orders retreated to Cyprus, Rhodes, and eventually Malta. But the dream of a Christian kingdom of Jerusalem was over. Without their original mission, the orders faced an identity crisis. They still possessed immense wealth, vast lands in Europe, and powerful armies, but no longer fought for the same unifying cause that had made them indispensable. And in an age when kings grew wary of rivals, that made them dangerous. The Templars faced the harshest fate. In 1307, King Philip IV of France, deeply in debt to the order, moved against them with ruthless efficiency. On a single day, Templars across France were arrested, accused of heresy, blasphemy, and secret rites. Under torture, many confessed to impossible crimes. Pope Clement V, under Philip's pressure, dissolved the order in 1312. Its lands were seized, its leaders burned at the stake, and the once proud Red Cross vanished from the battlefields of Europe. The Hospitallers and Teutonic Knights survived longer, but not without decline. The Hospitallers relocated to Rhodes, becoming a naval power against the Ottomans, yet they never regained the scale of influence they once held. The Teutonic Knights suffered a crushing blow at Grunwald in 1410, and their Baltic Empire slowly crumbled under the pressure of rising nation-states and the Protestant Reformation. By the 16th century, the great age of the crusading orders was over. Gunpowder had transformed warfare, making the towering stone castles that once symbolized their dominance increasingly obsolete. Monarchs now commanded standing armies, reducing the need for independent knightly orders. Yet their decline was not merely military, it was political. In an era when centralized power was everything, independent institutions with their own armies, fortresses, and treasuries could not survive without the favor of kings. For some, like the Templars, that favor vanished overnight. For others, it faded slowly, replaced by suspicion, envy, and the shifting priorities of a Europe entering the Renaissance. The legacy of the orders would live on, but their golden age, when a knight could be both monk and warrior, banker and builder, was gone forever. The fall of the great Crusader orders did not end their story. It transformed it. Stripped of their political power and military might, they entered a new battlefield. Memory, myth, and legend. Over the centuries, the names of the Templars, Hospitallers, and Teutonic Knights would echo not just in history books, but in whispered rumours, romantic tales, and conspiracy theories. The Templars became the most enduring in popular imagination. Their sudden destruction in 1312, their wealth disappearing into shadow, and the haunting execution of Grand Master Jacques de Molay, who, according to legend, cursed King Philip and the Pope as he burned, created fertile ground for speculation. Stories emerged of hidden treasure, secret knowledge, and ties to the Holy Grail. From medieval romances to modern novels, the Templars have been recast as guardians of sacred relics, keepers of forbidden truths, or victims of a colossal injustice. The Hospitallers took a different path. Though they no longer ruled vast Crusader states, they endured by adapting. As the sovereign military order of Malta, they continued their tradition of charity and medical care, their 8-pointed cross still recognized around the world. Even stripped of castles and armies, their legacy of service outlasted the empires that once sought their destruction. The Teutonic Knights too persisted. Though their Baltic Empire dissolved, the order survived as a religious and charitable institution. In modern times, they shifted from battlefield to philanthropy, their black cross still a reminder of their disciplined, if sometimes brutal, medieval origins. Legends surrounding these orders often blur the line between fact and fiction. Chroniclers exaggerated their deeds, enemies slandered them, and poets wove them into tales of romance and betrayal. The Templars' alleged connections to Freemasonry, the Hospitallers' secret diplomatic missions, and the Teutonic Knights' supposed lost relics all fed a centuries-long fascination. Their architectural legacy remains visible in stone fortresses scattered across Europe and the Middle East, Crac de Chevalier, Marienburg, and Chateau Pellerin standing as monuments to a time when faith was defended with steel. Today, the crusading orders occupy a unique place in cultural memory. They are part history, part myth, symbols of both the piety and brutality of the medieval world. Whether seen as holy warriors, ruthless conquerors, or mysterious guardians of ancient secrets, they continue to capture imaginations. Proof that, though their banners no longer fly in battle, the Crusader orders have never truly left the stage of history. The story of coffee in the Ottoman Empire begins not in Istanbul, but far to the south, in the rugged mountains of Yemen. By the early 16th century, Yemeni Sufi mystics had already been brewing the roasted beans as a way to stay awake during long nights of prayer. From the port of Mocha, this strange dark drink began its journey northward, carried in the holds of merchant ships along the Red Sea trade routes. When coffee first reached the imperial capital, it was unlike anything the Ottomans had tasted before. Tea was not yet common, and wine was forbidden by Islamic law, so this bitter, aromatic brew occupied a unique space. It was neither intoxicating nor bland. It awakened the mind while keeping the body alert, making it a natural companion for conversation, reflection, and work. The earliest cups in Istanbul were served in the private chambers of the elite. Palace kitchens experimented with the drink, perfecting its preparation in small copper pots known as kezve, and serving it in delicate porcelain cups without handles. The Ottomans quickly elevated coffee to an art form. Finely ground beans were simmered slowly over low heat, often sweetened and sometimes spiced with cardamom. The brewing process became almost ceremonial, a performance in miniature. Coffee's arrival coincided with a period of intense cultural flourishing in the Ottoman capital. Istanbul in the mid-1500s was a melting pot of languages, faiths, and trades, its markets teeming with goods from 3 continents. Coffee fit perfectly into this cosmopolitan atmosphere. Merchants from Syria, Yemen, and Egypt found eager customers among Istanbul's residents, who were always keen to sample the latest luxury from abroad. At first, coffee remained a drink for the wealthy and well-connected. Bags of beans were expensive, and brewing required specialized utensils. But its popularity grew rapidly, and soon the demand outstripped the palace walls. Traders began importing coffee in bulk, and enterprising vendors prepared it for common citizens. What had once been a rare indulgence of the court started appearing in workshops, markets, and street corners. By the time the first public coffee houses opened in Istanbul in the 1550s, the drink had already transformed from an exotic curiosity into a social necessity. In just a few decades, coffee had not only entered Ottoman life, it had begun to reshape it. From humble Yemeni origins, it was on its way to becoming the beating heart of urban culture in one of the world's greatest empires. By the mid-16th century, coffee had spilled beyond the confines of elite households and palace kitchens, and Istanbul was ready for a new kind of social space. The city's bustling streets, lined with spice markets, bathhouses and mosques, now gained an entirely new fixture, the public coffee house. The earliest recorded establishments appeared around 1554, founded by two enterprising men from Aleppo and Damascus. They recognized that coffee was more than a drink. It was a reason for people to gather. In these modest shops, small copper pots simmered over glowing charcoal, filling the air with a rich, earthy aroma. Wooden benches lined the walls, and customers sat shoulder to shoulder, sipping from porcelain cups as they engaged in conversation, watched storytellers, or played backgammon. These coffee houses were revolutionary for Ottoman urban life. Until their arrival, most public gathering spaces were tied to religion, trade, or leisure activities like the bathhouse. The coffee house created a neutral ground, open to merchants, artisans, scholars, soldiers, and travelers alike, where social boundaries could blur. A janissary might find himself sharing a table with a poet, or a merchant might overhear a debate between two theologians. The atmosphere was lively, often accompanied by the clack of game pieces, the rhythmic recitation of poetry, or the laughter of friends exchanging gossip. A single cup of coffee might last an hour, giving patrons ample time to talk, listen, and observe. Unlike taverns, which served alcohol, coffee houses encouraged clear-headed discussion, making them safe havens for both spirited debate and quiet reflection. Coffee house owners quickly learned that the environment mattered as much as the drink. Many decorated their spaces with carpets, lamps, and calligraphy. Some hired musicians or storytellers to keep patrons entertained. Others became known for their particular brewing style or for adding unique spices to the coffee. It didn't take long for these establishments to spread across the empire. From the capital to provincial towns, coffee houses became landmarks in the urban landscape. They served as morning meeting spots for tradesmen, afternoon retreats for scholars, and nighttime stages for performers. But their openness also attracted attention from the authorities. Here, conversations could wander from harmless poetry to sharp political critique. Within just a few years of their rise, coffee houses would become both cherished centres of community and suspect arenas in the eyes of the state, a dual reputation that would follow them for centuries. From their earliest days, Ottoman coffee houses became more than places to drink coffee. They were stages for culture. In a city where literacy was prized but not universal, these spaces brought the arts to life through performance. The moment you stepped inside a well-known coffee house in Istanbul's Tahtakale or Üsküdar districts, you might be greeted not by a merchant calling for orders, but by the rhythmic, almost hypnotic voice of a storyteller. Storytellers, known as medders, were masters of the spoken word. With a cane in hand and a scarf over their shoulder, they shifted effortlessly between characters, mimicking voices and weaving tales drawn from Ottoman history, folklore, and the wider Islamic world. They could make sultans seem as human as a neighbour, and turn everyday mishaps into comedies that had the entire room laughing. Coffee houses gave these performers a platform, and in return, the medders gave coffee houses their soul. Poetry, too, thrived in these smoky rooms. Patrons recited verses by the great Ottoman poets like Baki and Fuzuli, or improvised their own in a spirit of friendly competition. Poetic duels, where two wordsmiths exchanged witty couplets on the spot, were as exciting as any backgammon match. The slow sipping of coffee seemed to encourage both the patience to listen and the creativity to speak. Music was another frequent guest. Some coffee houses became known for the soft strains of the oud or ney, their melodies blending with the low murmur of conversation and the clink of cups. In certain venues, shadow puppetry performances, karagos and hasivat, would draw crowds in the evenings, their playful banter and social satire making both children and adults laugh. These artistic gatherings blurred the lines between entertainment and education. Stories carried moral lessons, poems conveyed philosophical reflections, and songs preserved oral traditions. For many, the coffee house was not just a social venue, but an informal school, one where you could learn history, language, and wit without ever opening a book. As word of these vibrant gatherings spread, artists and intellectuals began to seek out coffee houses as places to test new ideas, refine their work, or simply find an audience. In this way, the Ottoman coffee house became a cultural hub, part theatre, part classroom, part salon, where creativity could thrive in the warm glow of oil lamps and the steady scent of freshly brewed coffee. While poetry and storytelling gave Ottoman coffee houses their cultural prestige, games gave them their everyday heartbeat. Step into one on a late afternoon, and you'd hear more than just the hum of conversation. You'd hear the sharp clack of backgammon pieces, the shuffle of playing cards, and bursts of laughter as friends teased each other over a well-played move. Backgammon, or tavla, reigned supreme. Its origins stretched back centuries, and in the Ottoman coffee house it became more than just a pastime. It was a display of wit and strategy. Old men hunched over boards like generals over battle maps, while younger players hovered nearby, learning tricks and debating the odds. The rhythmic roll of dice was as much a part of the coffee house soundscape as the simmering sezvi. Chess also held a place of honour. Patrons who fancied themselves intellectuals would engage in slow, deliberate matches, drawing on tactics as old as Persia itself. A single game could stretch for hours, accompanied by sips of coffee and murmured analysis from onlookers. For many, these games were not just entertainment. They were a way to test one's mind, patience, and composure. Card games, often imported from Europe, added variety to the leisure mix, though they occasionally sparked moral debates. Some religious scholars frowned upon their association with gambling, yet in many coffee houses they were played in a friendly spirit, with wagers limited to pride and bragging rights. Leisure in the coffee house extended beyond the games themselves. It was in the pauses between moves, in the long, companionable silences, and in the quiet observation of passers-by through open doors. Here, men escaped the pressures of work and family for an hour or two, finding comfort in routine. Regulars had their favourite spots, and friendships deepened over countless shared cups. The coffee house was also a place where news was traded as quickly as gossip. Merchants shared rumours about market prices, travellers brought tales from distant provinces, and political developments often arrived here before they were formally announced. A game board might pause mid-match while a patron recounted a new decree from the palace or a scandal from the court. In the Ottoman coffee house, leisure was never idle. Every game, every chat, and every sip of coffee wove together into a rich tapestry of daily life, a blend of competition, camaraderie, and the unhurried pleasures that made these establishments indispensable to the rhythm of the city. As Ottoman coffee houses flourished, they became more than cultural salons and gaming parlours. They evolved into political nerve centres. The same qualities that made them ideal for poetry and leisurely debate also made them perfect for the exchange of political ideas. In an empire that stretched across 3 continents, information travelled in fragments, rumours, and whispers, and the coffee house was where those fragments came together. Inside, merchants from the bazaar discussed changes in tax policy. Janissaries shared grievances about their pay, and clerks speculated on shifts in the Sultan's court. A single conversation might jump from the price of grain to the latest military campaign, weaving together local concerns with imperial affairs. The coffee house gave ordinary citizens, who had no place in the halls of power, a forum to voice opinions and measure the mood of the city. This openness, however, did not escape the attention of the authorities. Sultans and their viziers quickly recognized that coffee houses could act as incubators for dissent. Political satire, woven subtly into a storyteller's tale or a shadow puppet play, could carry sharper criticism than any public speech. News, real or exaggerated, spread rapidly from one coffee house to another,